Like so many others, I spent a fair chunk of my childhood playing the original Gran Turismo. Looking back through my childhood and teen years, I can clearly see how cult car enthusiast games like Gran Turismo and Need for Speed Underground, along with movies like the early Fast and Furious films, had a significant influence on my becoming obsessed with cars and motor racing in my teen years.
Did you see my wheelies?
Yes.
Alright.
When I got my license, I pretty much forgot about computer games altogether and focused all my time and resources into enjoying and modifying cars in the real world, and only really returned to gaming once real life started getting busier and finding time out on the track in real life became more difficult. I turned back to the virtual world for the spur of the moment quick fix I could no longer get from the real world. And that ultimately brought me back to where I am now, completely submerged in the world of sim racing and pursuing the creation of the most realistic sim racing content possible with today's technology. So why am I telling you all this? Because every once in a while a game comes along that captures the essence of what it means to be a car enthusiast. Gran Turismo 7 is a game that not only carries massive nostalgic value for my generation, but I believe paves the way for the next generation of up-and-coming motoring and sim racing enthusiasts. Now, you've probably already seen a heap of Gran Turismo 7 reviews picking the game to pieces and analysing all the various different aspects from graphics to audio and physics, and we'll be definitely covering those things in some detail today. But what I really wanted to achieve today is giving you a sense of why, even though Gran Turismo 7 isn't anywhere near the most realistic driving game when it comes to handling and physics, and will often drive you to the point of frustration with its quirks, it captures something very special that most other driving games fail to deliver, and that is the brilliant job it does at immersing you in the world of the car enthusiast and making you fall more deeply in love with cars and motorsports in general. So strap in, let's dive into Gran Turismo 7 and why I believe this is the most important racing game of this generation. Now, the first thing to understand about Gran Turismo 7 is that it's not massively groundbreaking. As somebody who hasn't really sunk a whole lot of time into Gran Turismo since the 5th iteration on PlayStation 3 back in 2010, I'd expected a massive leap forward in pretty much every regard. While there are some obvious generational improvements across the board, the game is more evolutionary than revolutionary. While I'd be lying if I didn't say that at face value this was a little disappointing, what I didn't expect is that GT7 would bury me deep in nostalgia and perhaps make me appreciate just how good those earlier titles were. From the get-go, the game has a seasoned and mature feel to it, far removed from the bro-dude feeling of Forza Horizon, for example. The developer, Polyphony Digital, is an internal Japanese first-party video game development studio for PlayStation Studios. And having worked for Sony Electronics myself from 2010 to 2016, I can definitely see how Sony's very pride-driven approach to everything shines through here. It's obvious right from the long and unskippable intro video that they really want to take you on a journey of appreciation for all things automotive and motorsport. Because of this approach, the game does have a more linear gameplay style, and this can be quite frustrating, particularly if you're expecting to just jump in and pretty much pick up where you left off in GT6 or GT Sport. While I applaud things like not making multiplayer gameplay available until you've proven yourself to at least be a competent driver, as it would no doubt improve the online gameplay experience overall, I think that some sort of middle ground where the more experienced players are able to jump straight to the final license test and power through them, rather than having to grind through hours of driving tests which are far beneath their skill level. The initial grind is going to frustrate a lot of people with this game. The flow of gameplay is managed through the cafe, where a character named Luca issues you with a variety of different challenges which are organised into what they call menu books. Each menu book includes tasks like completing licenses, placing in races to collect cars, and purchasing vehicle upgrades. Along the way, Luca takes you through a series of history lessons which are a fantastic way for younger generations or players with less automotive knowledge to develop a deeper appreciation. While quite linear, it does provide enough variety to the gameplay to keep you engaged, even if you do find the challenges themselves a little bit easy. Although after a few hours, I was screaming at Luca to give me something fast to drive. At any point, you can jump out of the main campaign mode and complete things like time trials or single races. However, only cars and locations that you've unlocked through the campaign mode will be available. There are a few faster cars mixed in during the earlier stages of the game, such as the Castrol 97 Tom's GT500 Toyota Supra, of course, a GT classic there. But for the most part, during the early stages of the game, you are limited to painfully slow cars, such as the Toyota Aqua S, Honda Fit, or Mazda Demio. Importantly, as I touched on earlier, multiplayer gameplay also doesn't become available until you've completed at least a couple of hours of campaigns through the cafe. Multiplayer gameplay is split up into two different modes, a sport mode which is reserved for more serious ranked racing, and more general multiplayer lobbies which anybody can create. At the time of this review, multiplayer is still being developed, but as it stands right now, this is one area of the game I feel is definitely lacking. At any given time, Sport Mode only allowed us to access 2 different races, and both had to be completed with the painfully slow aforementioned menu book 1 cars. So if you wanted to buy the game and just jump straight into racing fast cars online like you can with the Assetto Corsa Competizione, for example, this is not for you. One of the aspects of Gran Turismo I loved most as a kid was the tuning shop, and I'm happy to say that this is an integral part of GT7. As with many other games, you can use credits you've earned through completing tasks to purchase new cars and then of course upgrade them. And there's a huge variety of upgrades available, from obvious things like exhaust systems, engine tuning and bigger turbos, suspension of course too, to more specialized upgrades like anti-lag. There is of course a wide variety of cosmetic upgrades and customizations available too, and this is one area that I think the game really shines. Many of the upgrades consist of genuine real-world brands and parts. So say for example you want to change the wheels on the car, you can choose from a very extensive range of real-life wheels from manufacturers such as BBS, Enkei, Work, and etc. This creates a fantastic sense of fusion between the virtual and real world, and recreating your real-world car or your childhood dream car in-game has become almost a rite of passage in the world of Gran Turismo. Again, while this isn't something particularly groundbreaking in that it's not a new concept, it's very well integrated into the game. Learning how to extract the best performance out of your cars in-game is just as important as knowing how to drive them quickly, and this is one of the aspects that I love about GT7. So while we're on the subject of cars, there's over 420 cars featured in the game at launch, quite a step down from the 1,000 or more cars that were available in GT6, but the focus is on quality over quantity here, and the cars that we've tested so far are meticulously presented. The game presents a good variety of different cars that I'm sure will keep most players engaged, especially when you consider the amount of performance and aesthetic customizations available as we mentioned earlier. In total, there's 34 different locations with 90 different layouts available in the game, including some of your favorite racetracks from around the world, as well as GT classics like High Speed Ring. All of the tracks have a high quality feel to them, with plenty of detail in the track surface as it's communicated through the controller or force feedback in the wheel, and the attention to detail in the graphics is very impressive. It's certainly not a case of just porting the tracks across from Gran Turismo Sport. They've obviously put a lot of time and effort into overhauling all the tracks available in GT7. I believe many of the tracks are laser scan, although I'm not exactly sure which tracks those are. Regardless, the sense of speed and sensation of undulation and surface texture is excellent across the board, and I didn't notice any specific tracks that were obviously lacking. Now, physics is an area where I'm perhaps a little spoiled. I spent the majority of my time racing full-blown simulation titles like iRacing and Assetto Corsa Competizione on a very expensive sim rig, so I'm accustomed to the best of the best when it comes to simulating car physics.
Bit of a tail slide. Tyres still a little cold.
Whilst touted as the real driving simulator since the very beginning, we have to manage our expectation here and realise that the GT series is and always has been aiming to hit a healthy middle ground between providing enough realism and enough of a challenge to keep the more hardcore sim racers happy, but also being accessible enough to more casual and inexperienced players that the barrier to entry isn't so high that they just give up and go back to their favourite arcade title. The physics also have to be tuned such that players using a controller aren't massively disadvantaged, and we'll talk about the control interface a little bit later on. So for what it is and what it's aiming to achieve, I think that GT7 hits a pretty good balance. It's certainly not the most advanced title out there when it comes to hardcore simulation, but you do get a good sense of what the car's doing and how it's interfacing with the road surface. And the physics are certainly advanced enough that they do reward good real-world driving techniques such as trail braking and generally maintaining good balance through your inputs. Overdrive the car and you will absolutely be punished. One strange thing that I did notice is that when you miss a turn and end up in a gravel trap, the car becomes quite a lot easier to turn back onto the track rather than harder as you would expect if you were driving in gravel as opposed to on an asphalt surface. And while this certainly does feel quite arcade, I'm sure it's something that they have done intentionally given the nature of the game. Now, another aspect of the physics worthy of mention is the detailed car setup options available. This, along with performance upgrades, is a fundamentally important aspect of the game and something that will provide many hours of learning and exploring for those inclined. Now, weather and dynamic time is a new feature to Gran Turismo 7 and adds a really interesting and challenging dynamic to the game, although it's not available at all tracks. The interface is quite similar to that of Assetto Corsa Competizione and allows you to either customize the weather so it transitions at various stages throughout the race, or have it be randomly generated. The rain itself is really well implemented. Grip increases and decreases quite convincingly as the track state changes, and you'll need to keep an eye on the grip meter and rain radar to ensure that you don't get caught out with the wrong tyres. You will see standing water develop on the circuit as rain falls, however I didn't feel a whole lot of variation in the grip levels across the track surface itself compared to Assetto Corsa Competizione, for example. Nor does standing water upset the balance of the car and make the car try to rotate as it does in real life if you were to, say for example, hit a puddle with just one side of the car. Unlike weather, dynamic time is available at all locations throughout the game. This allows you to set up a specific time to begin your race, and you can also speed up time by multipliers up to 10 times to get a wider variance in shorter races. For example, if you wanted to do a day to night transition in a 10-lap race. Again, this is nothing particularly groundbreaking, as it is a feature that's been available in other titles for years, but it is really well implemented, and the lighting effects it generates when coupled with varying weather do add a lot of immersion and longevity to the game. Gran Turismo 7 is available on both PlayStation 4 and 5. All of our gameplay has been done with the PlayStation 5, so we can't really comment on the PS4 version, but once again, it is important to remember that I am spoiled when it comes to graphics, as my daily driver sim rig runs a 3090 graphics card with three 65-inch 4K screens, so I'm accustomed to cutting-edge graphics. Adjusting my expectations accordingly and comparing to other PS5 driving titles, I do have to say that the graphics in GT7 do leave me just a little bit underwhelmed. Not because there's necessarily anything wrong with them, but honestly they just aren't all that big of a jump from GT Sport on the PS4. Thinking back to the 90s when I sunk hundreds of hours into gameplay on the original PlayStation console, I recall there were multiple significant leaps in visual detail during the PlayStation console's lifetime. I recall in particular Ridge Racer Type 4 being a huge leap over other games that were available at the time, and each Need for Speed release always seemed to manage to squeeze a bit more performance out of the hardware. Despite being almost impossible to buy at retail price at least, the PS5 has been around for well over a year now, so I guess I was just hoping to see something a little bit more groundbreaking here. That said, however, the lighting and volumetric effects such as smoke and fog and the way the lighting interacts with things like rain and scenery is very good and more than enough to keep you immersed in the gameplay. Perhaps it's as simple as we are just at the limit of what the PS5 can handle and I'm just expecting too much, so let me know what you guys think in the comments. Sound, on the other hand, is fantastic and something that jumped out at me straight away. As we touched on earlier, it's obvious that Polyphony has taken a lot of pride in the audio presentation throughout the game, as has always been the case in Gran Turismo titles, and every aspect of the sound from the in-game music to the engine sounds are absolutely fantastic. Subtle nuances and characteristics of the various different cars are clearly audible, such as turbo spool, compressor surge and blow-off valves, and upgrading your cars with features such as anti-lag does change the sound just as it would in real life, which adds a lot more depth to the gameplay. Now, AI quality is perhaps one of the most important factors in making or breaking any racing game when it comes to single-player gameplay. GT7 gives you 3 different difficulty levels to choose from and does not have independent control for strength and aggression as are present in some other racing titles. Personally, I would have liked to have seen more customization available here. The AI itself behaves quite well and does have a bit of personality in that cars don't always behave in exactly the same manner given the same variables as is the case in many other racing games. However, it is still relatively predictable and I found it quite easy to beat even on the hardest setting. Although this can be manipulated by adjusting the balance of performance between your car and the AI cars to make the races a little bit more challenging. One thing I did notice is that the AI is a little stronger in the rain than it is in the dry. Unrealistic grip levels at times allow the cars to outpace you on raw mechanical grip. As is the case with AI in most racing games, you'll find areas of most tracks where it's almost impossible to keep up with the AI cars through certain sections, but then easy to blitz past them in others. Overall, I think the AI implementation is good in that it provides some quality battles and challenges and is on par with the likes of Assetto Corsa Competizione and F1 2021. Now, photo mode in GT7 is absolutely fantastic and something that I can see myself sinking almost as much time into as I do tuning and driving the cars. Now that might sound silly, but if automotive photography is your jam, then you'll absolutely love photo mode in GT7. Not only can you enter photo mode from within a gameplay replay, but there's also a range of different photo sets available through the scenes section in the menu, and this allows you to photograph cars in different locations all around the world. Once you've set up your scene, you enter the camera interface, which gives you control over all the same features that you'd expect to find on a professional mirrorless or DSLR camera, giving you complete creative control. As we touched on before when discussing physics, GT7 strikes a good balance between being accessible to new players without scaring them off by being too difficult and providing enough complexity in the physics to provide a challenge. A few days ago now, we published a video comparing my first experience in GT7 with a hand controller to my first experience with the Fanatec GT DD Pro direct drive wheel and CSL pedals. And while as expected, I was more consistent with the wheel and pedals, one thing that really stood out to me was just how good a job the PS5 DualSense controller does at conveying the car's behavior through your hands. The haptic feedback is mind-blowingly detailed for what it is and very much surprised me, in particular the genuine hydraulic feeling that they've been able to achieve with the analog L2 trigger mapped to the brake. While it doesn't provide the same level of detail for threshold braking you'd expect to find on an expensive set of load cell or hydraulic pedals, it provides more than enough to give a good sense of what the car is doing and a far deeper level of immersion than I was expecting from a hand controller. It just goes to show that as long as the detail you're getting is communicating useful information and not bombarding you with noise, your brain is actually amazingly good at filling in the blanks and immersing you in the virtual world, even though those sensations aren't necessarily being channeled through the same way as they would if you were driving a real car. Now, I tried steering with a controller using the left thumbstick as well as motion control, and while motion control was a little bit smoother and did tend to be less harsh on tires, I found I struggled with sharp low speed hairpins as I couldn't get the car rotated as quickly as I would with a steering wheel. As for driving with a wheel, we tested with both the Logitech G923 and Fanatec GT DD Pro. The force feedback carries a good level of detail and is a clear step up from previous titles, including GT Sport. In particular, there's a more nuanced detail present in road textures, suspension movement, and curves, and as with DualSense, the balance of the car is communicated well, allowing you greater control of the car on the ragged edge of adhesion. While the steering wheel and pedals is a worthy upgrade and will certainly see you more deeply immersed in the driving experience, you certainly aren't going to have a bad time with a controller. So in conclusion, GT7 is a bit of a mixed bag for me, and I really think that whether or not you like this game will ultimately boil down to your own personal expectations and what you're looking to get out of the game. One of the questions I've been receiving most is GT a proper driving simulator now? It does a really good job at being a one-size-fits-all driving game with a little bit of something for everybody, but aiming for a wider target audience will always come at the expense of falling short in some aspects. And although this is a step closer, it doesn't offer anywhere near the same level of realism in terms of physics and car control that you'll find in more hardcore sim racing titles such as iRacing and ACC. And with ACC now being available natively on PS5, this is an important consideration. But at the same time, it is a far more approachable title as a result. I can't see the more hardcore sim racers abandoning their PCs and switching over to GT7, but I don't think that anybody was really expecting that anyway. We have to accept that the more hardcore sim racing titles will always be aimed at a smaller and more niche audience than a game like this. And the holy grail for many sim racers, and what I think a lot of sim racers are hoping for in GT7, is a simulation experience, or at least a simulation mode which offers the same level of realism available in more hardcore sim racing focused titles, whilst maintaining an equally immersive storyline and general gameplay. Although I don't think this game quite ticks that box, it is a lot closer than a Gran Turismo title has come to date. Whilst touted as the real driving simulator, I think the real car enthusiast simulator might be a more fitting title. Whilst more linear in its gameplay style, especially during the initial phases where you're still unlocking cars and tracks than some, including myself, might prefer, for others this will be a great way to immerse themselves beyond just the driving aspect of a racing game and into the history of car culture, tuner culture, car setups, and more, and all presented in a very mature manner which I'm sure will appeal to young and old. While it is a more evolutionary title than revolutionary, GT7 will provide great nostalgic value to anybody who's loved the previous games, with the advantages of improved graphics, physics, controls, sound, and some more modern cars added to the mix. But what excites me most about GT7 is the new generation of car-curious people who will undoubtedly come to form a deeper appreciation for car culture, heritage, and motorsport through this game, just as it did for me growing up with the originals. At this point in time, no other driving game gives the same sense of appreciation for all things automotive, and for that reason, in my opinion, Gran Turismo 7 is the most important driving game we've seen in a decade. I can't wait to see new players entering the wonderful world of sim racing and finding the same joy so many of us have already found.